October 5th, 1943, 0647 hours, Wake Island. Lieutenant Commander Shigematsu Sakaida banked his Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter into a lazy circle at 18,000 feet, sunlight glinting off the polished aluminum cowling. 9 victories. 9 American fighters torn from Pacific skies. Below him, Wake's coral runway shimmered in morning heat. His wingman's voice crackled through the radio. "Commander, aircraft approaching from bearing 045. They look like Wildcats." Sakaida smiled inside his leather flight helmet. Wildcats. The stubby American fighters they'd been eating alive for 2 years. Heavy, slow, clumsy in the vertical. The Zero could outturn them, outclimb them, outmaneuver them at every altitude. It wasn't even fair anymore. "Let them come," Sakaida said. "Same as always." He'd said those exact words 17 days earlier over Marcus Island. Same confidence, same tactical assessment. The Americans kept throwing the same obsolete fighters at Japan's aerial samurai, expecting different results. Definition of insanity, really. Sakaida adjusted his throttle, preparing the dance he'd perfected. Wait for the Americans to commit. Lure them into a turning fight. Let the Zero's 23-foot wingspan and 5 300-pound weight work their magic. Watch them struggle. Watch them stall. Watch them burn. Textbook. The approaching formation grew larger. 6 aircraft. No, 8. They were flying in pairs. Disciplined formation. Standard American tactics. Sakaida counted them off, already calculating angles, already seeing 3 steps ahead. Then something felt wrong. These weren't Wildcats. The fuselages were thicker, longer. The wings looked different, broader, heavier, and they were fast, closing distance at a rate no Wildcat had ever managed. "Commander?" His wingman's voice had lost its casual tone. Sakaida's hand tightened on the control stick. 2,000 horsepower Sakai radial engine humming behind him. The finest fighter Japan had ever built. Light as a feather, maneuverable as a hummingbird. Undefeated master of Pacific skies. "I see them," he said. What Commander Sakaida didn't know was that he was looking at his own obsolescence. 8 Grumman F6F Hellcats, each weighing 12,500 pounds, fully loaded, more than twice his Zero's weight. Each powered by a Pratt Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, generating 2,000 horsepower. 60% more than his Sakai engine. Each armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns loaded with armor-piercing incendiary rounds specifically designed to penetrate and ignite. What he didn't know was that his fuel tank, unarmored, unprotected, sitting directly behind his seat, was about to become a liability that would redefine air combat in the Pacific. What he didn't know was that in the next 11 minutes, 6 of his 9-victory career would be rendered meaningless. The Americans kept coming, not breaking, not turning, not playing by rules Sakaida had mastered. "Commander?" "Hold formation," Sakaida said, but for the first time in 2 years of combat, uncertainty crept into his voice, like ice water. The first Hellcat opened fire at 800 yards. At a distance no Wildcat would dare attempt. With a precision no Wildcat could achieve. And Commander Sakaida realized, with crystal clarity, that everything had changed. Rewind, 18 months. January 30th, 1942. Bethpage, Long Island, New York. Temperature, 26 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind howling off the Atlantic, cutting through wool coats like piano wire. Inside Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation's Plant No. 2, the The air tasted of machine oil, aluminum shavings, and something else. Desperation. Leroy Grumman stood in his office, staring at a telegram from the Navy Department. His reading glasses had slipped down his nose. He didn't bother pushing them back up. The F4F Wildcat, his fighter, his design, his baby, was getting shredded in the Pacific. Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, Philippines. Everywhere American and Japanese fighters met, the same story repeated. Zeros danced circles around Wildcats. Literally. Pilots reported turning fights where Zeros could complete 2 full rotations before a Wildcat finished one. The kill ratio at Coral Sea, roughly even, and that was considered a victory. The kill ratio at Pearl Harbor, laughable. They're calling it the Zeros War, his chief engineer, Bill Schwendler, said from the doorway. He held a folder marked Classified. Navy wants improvements. They want them yesterday. Grumman removed his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief that smelled of cigarettes and coffee. What do our pilots say? Schwendler opened the folder. Combat reports, interviews, debriefs from pilots who'd survived encounters with Zeros. The same words repeated across dozens of pages. Couldn't outturn it. Couldn't outclimb it. Tried to dogfight. Mistake. Lost visual in the turn. Zero just disappeared. One report, from a Marine pilot at Midway, was more specific. The Zero is lighter, faster in the turn, and can operate at altitudes where our engines cough and die. Fighting a Zero in a turning engagement is suicide. We need a different airplane or different tactics, preferably both. Grumman tapped the telegram. The British Hurricanes lost to Zeros over Burma. The Dutch Brewster Buffaloes lasted about 90 seconds per aircraft. Our Wildcats are holding, barely because our pilots are learning not to dogfight. But that's defensive. We're not winning. We're surviving. So what do we do? Schwendler asked. We don't build a Zero, Grumman said. We build the thing that annihilates Zeros. Here's what everyone, Navy brass, aviation journalists, even some of Grumman's own engineers, thought was impossible. Building a carrier-based fighter that was heavier than the Zero, faster than the Zero, more maneuverable than the Zero at high speeds, better armed than the Zero, better protected than the Zero, still able to operate from carriers. The physics didn't work, couldn't work. More weight meant worse performance. Every engineering textbook said so. The Japanese had optimized the Zero by stripping away everything non-essential: armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, redundant systems. It was a flying razor blade, and it dominated because it followed the rules. Grumman's team was about to break the rules. February through July 1942. The design took shape in drafting rooms where men worked 16-hour shifts, sleeping on cots next to their desks. Coffee cups multiplied like bacteria. Ashtrays overflowed. The F6F prototype emerged from philosophy forged in failure. Pilot protection first. Leroy Grumman, himself a former naval aviator, had one non-negotiable rule. The absolute last thing to fail on this aircraft is the cockpit. They built armor plating behind the pilot's seat, 212 pounds of steel plate that would stop a 20 mm cannon round. They installed self-sealing fuel tanks, rubber-lined bladders that would swell and close around bullet holes. The Japanese had rejected this technology as too heavy. Grumman embraced it. They added a bulletproof windscreen, 3 layers of laminated glass, optically corrected, weighing 47 pounds. Every addition made the airplane heavier. Every additional pound made traditional aviation engineers wince. "You're building a flying tank," one consultant told Grumman. "It'll never get off a carrier deck." "It'll get off," Grumman said, "with the pilot still inside it. alive. Your power to overcome weight. The Zero's Nakajima Sake engine, 1,130 horsepower. The original F6F design called for a Wright R2600 Cyclone, 1,700 horsepower. Then combat reports from Midway arrived. Pilots described Zeros climbing at angles that seemed to defy gravity, maintaining maneuverability at altitudes where American engines starved. Schwendler burst into Grumman's office on June 15, 1942. Change of plans. Navy just sent us intelligence from a captured Zero in the Aleutians. We've got exact specifications now. The Akutan Zero, a Japanese fighter that had crash-landed intact on Akutan Island, Alaska. American engineers had recovered it, restored it to flying condition, and tested every performance characteristic. They discovered the Zero's secrets and its weaknesses. The Zero maintains performance through weight reduction, Schwendler explained, spreading photographs across Grumman's desk. No armor here, here, or here. No self-sealing tanks. Structure is lightweight aluminum. Minimal redundancy. One good burst of .50 caliber, and it comes apart like tissue paper. Grumman studied the photos, looked at the fuel tank location. So we're building the opposite. We're building the opposite, Schwendler confirmed, which means we need more power. They scrapped the R2600 Cyclone. They installed the Pratt Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, 2,000 horsepower, 18 cylinders, 2 rows, the most powerful production radial engine America had. The F6F weighed 9,238 pounds empty. The Zero weighed 5,313 pounds empty. That's almost double, an engineer pointed out. That's fine, Grumman replied. We're not trying to out-zero the Zero. We're trying to make the Zero irrelevant. Arms to end fights fast. 6 Browning M, 2.50 caliber machine guns, 400 rounds per gun. Total ammunition, 2,400 rounds. Combined rate of fire, 4,800 rounds per minute. They mounted them in the wings, 3 per side, synchronized to converge at 300 yards. At that range, the 6.50 cals created a cone of destruction 10 feet in diameter. Each round, armor-piercing incendiary, hardened steel core to punch through aluminum, followed by an incendiary charge to ignite whatever it hit. Yeet! Fuel, hydraulics, ammunition, pilot. The Zero carried 2 7.7 mm machine guns and 2 20 mm cannons. Effective, but the 20 mm cannons had limited ammunition, just 60 rounds per gun, and a slower rate of fire. The Hellcats' .50 cals could sustain fire for 30 continuous seconds, an eternity in air combat. The Zero wins turning fights, Grumman told his engineering team in a July meeting. So we don't turn. We dive in fast, shoot straight, and climb back out before the Zero can react. Speed and firepower instead of agility. That's not dogfighting, someone said. Exactly, Grumman replied. Dogfighting is for pilots who have time. Our pilots will be too busy winning. The prototype flew for the first time on June 26, 1942. Test pilot Robert Hall climbed to 10,000 feet, put the Hellcat through basic maneuvers, and landed 22 minutes later. His report: she's heavy, she's fast, and she'll take punishment. But the real test wasn't in New York. It was out there, in the Pacific, where Zeros still ruled the sky, and Japanese pilots still believed, with good reason, that American fighters were target practice. Production began in October 1942. By August 1943, The first operational Hellcats reached carrier decks aboard USS Yorktown and USS Essex. The pilots looked at them with skepticism. One pilot, Ensign Robert Duncan from VF-5 Squadron, walked around his assigned Hellcat on the Yorktown's flight deck. He kicked the tires, climbed into the cockpit, felt the weight, the bulk, the armor plate pressing against his back. "Feels like I am sitting in a Buick," he muttered to his wingman. "A Buick with 6.50 cals," the wingman replied. "Yeah," Duncan said, "but can it fight a Zero?" August 31st, 1943. Marcus Island raid. They were about to find out. What Duncan didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the Hellcat wasn't just a fighter. It was a zero annihilation machine, engineered with cold precision to exploit every vulnerability Japan's finest fighter possessed, built from lessons written in blood across 2 years of aerial combat. The Japanese were expecting Wildcats. They were about to meet something very different. And the Pacific Air War was about to change forever. Marcus Island, August 31st, 1943. 0520 hours. USS Yorktown's flight deck, 128 miles north of the target. Air temperature, 81 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, 94%. The smell of aviation gasoline and hot hydraulic fluid hung heavy. Ensign Robert Duncan settled into his Hellcat's cockpit. Buno 08835. Fresh paint. First combat mission. His hands moved through the pre-flight checklist by memory, but his mind was racing. Everything he'd trained for, every tactic, every maneuver, was built around the Wildcat. Small, nimble, quick in the turn, the Hellcat felt different. Heavier, less responsive, like trading a sports car for a truck. The catapult officer gave the signal. Duncan saluted, leaned back against the armor plate, and slammed the throttle forward. The R-2800 engine roared, 2,000 horses. The Hellcat accelerated down the deck, heavy and determined, and lifted into gray dawn sky. Below, the Pacific looked like hammered steel. Ahead, Marcus Island waited, a coral speck fortified with Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft guns. 23 Hellcats from VF-5, VF-6, and VF-9 formed up. Radio discipline, clean formation. They climbed to 15,000 feet. At 0612 hours, they spotted the Japanese fighters rising to meet them. Zeros, 11 of them, light, fast, climbing like homesick angels. Duncan's pulse kicked. This was it. First contact. The moment that would define whether the Hellcat was brilliant or a billion-dollar mistake. Hellcat 1-5 to all aircraft. Duncan's squadron commander's voice came through clear. Remember your briefing. Do not turn with them. Dive, shoot, extend. Speed is our advantage. Use it. Dive, shoot, extend. Boom and zoom. It wasn't the tactics Duncan had practiced in Wildcats, but the briefers had been adamant. The Hellcat is faster. The Hellcat is heavier. The Hellcat carries more ammunition. You don't dogfight. You execute. The Zeros kept climbing. 16,000 feet. 17,000. Their exhaust trails drew white lines against blue sky. Duncan watched them. So light. So graceful. They moved like they were part of the air itself. Then the order came. All Hellcats, attack run, now. 23. Hellcats rolled, inverted, and dove. Gravity plus 2,000 horsepower plus 12,500 pounds equals acceleration physics textbooks would applaud. The Hellcats hit 380 miles per hour in the dive. Then 400. Then 420. The Zeros tried to scatter, but they were too high, too slow, caught in the climb. Duncan picked a target, 0 at 11 o'clock, frantically trying to turn into the attack. He centered the Pipper, counted distance, 600 yards, 500, 400, and squeezed the trigger. 6.50 caliber machine guns opened fire. The sound, inside the cockpit, through the airframe, transmitted through bone, was like the world tearing apart. The Zero disintegrated. Not caught fire. Not spiraled down. Disintegrated. The entire tail section separated. The wings folded upward. The fuel tank exploded in an orange-white fireball that Duncan flew through 3 seconds later, buffeted by the blast. He hadn't expected that. In Wildcat training, killing a Zero required sustained fire, multiple passes, patience. You chipped away at them. This was different. This was surgical obliteration. Duncan pulled out of the dive at 8,000 feet, the Hellcat's sturdy airframe absorbing G-forces that would have bent a Zero's lightweight structure. He climbed back up using pure engine power, something no Zero could match in a straight vertical. Around him, the other Hellcats were executing the same tactic. Dive, fire, extend, climb, repeat. The Zeros, masters of the turning dogfight, suddenly had no one to turn with. The Hellcats refused to play the game Japan had perfected. Duncan spotted another Zero, this one trying to dive away. Bad decision. The Zero's lightweight construction limited its dive speed. Dive too fast, and the airframe would fail. Structural limits, around 450 miles per hour. Turned the Hellcat's limit, 545 miles per hour. Duncan followed the Zero down, gaining on it effortlessly. At 500 yards, he fired a 2-second burst. 72 rounds, 18 hit. The Zero's right wing ripped off. The aircraft tumbled, spinning like a broken propeller, trailing smoke and pieces. 11 minutes after first contact, Marcus Island raid results. Zeros shot down, 11. Zeros probable, 3. Zeros damaged, 6. Hellcats lost, 0. Hellcat damage, minor bullet holes in 2 aircraft. Both pilots safely returned. Duncan landed back on Yorktown at 07:23 hours. 2 victories, his first combat mission. He climbed out of the cockpit, legs shaking from adrenaline, and looked at his Hellcat. Bullet holes in the left aileron, holes in the tail, holes in the wing root. He'd taken hits he hadn't even noticed. The armor had done its job. The self-sealing tanks had done their job. The structural integrity had done its job. How was it? His crew chief asked. Duncan searched for words. It's not a fighter. It's a Zero annihilator. News of Marcus Island spread through the Pacific Fleet like wildfire. Intelligence officers studied the combat reports, looking for the trick, the lucky circumstances, the anomaly. There was no anomaly. The Hellcat had done exactly what Leroy Grumman designed it to do, make the Zero's advantages irrelevant. Here's what the Japanese missed. The Zero dominated because it could outturn any Allied fighter in a slow-speed, low-altitude turning fight. Japanese pilots trained for this. Their entire tactical doctrine centered on it. But the Hellcat didn't engage in turning fights. The Hellcat fought in the vertical. Dive down, climb back up, use speed, use power, use altitude. The Zero's 1,130 horsepower couldn't compete with the Hellcat's 2,000 horsepower in a vertical climb. Physics doesn't negotiate. Here's what the Japanese also missed. The Zero achieved its performance by sacrificing protection. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, lightweight structure. This made it vulnerable to a single tactical reality. Whoever shoots first with sufficient firepower wins. The Hellcat's 6.50 caliber guns, firing armor-piercing incendiary rounds, turned the Zero's fuel tank into a floating bomb. One good burst, 2 seconds sustained fire, and the Zero ignited. Pilots started calling them Zippos after the reliable lighter. One click, instant flame. Here's what the Japanese definitely missed. American piloted training had evolved. After Midway, after Coral Sea, after 2 years of getting outturned by Zeros, U.S. Navy fighter doctrine changed. They studied the Thatch weave, mutual support tactics. They studied boom and zoom, energy fighting. They studied gunnery, deflection shots, lead computation, trigger discipline. By August 1943, American naval aviators weren't just pilots. They were engineers of violence, trained to exploit specific vulnerabilities with specific weapons in specific scenarios. The Japanese were still training pilots in the art of dogfighting. The Americans were training pilots in the science of elimination. And here's the detail that doomed Japan. The Hellcat was easy to fly. Leroy Grumman's design philosophy prioritized pilot proficiency. The Hellcat had forgiving stall characteristics. It had wide landing gear for stable carrier operations. It had good visibility. It didn't punish mistakes harshly. The Zero was difficult to fly at its limits. It required finesse, experience, mastery. In the hands of a veteran Japanese ace with 500 flight hours, the Zero was poetry. In the hands of a replacement pilot with 100 flight hours, which Japan was increasingly forced to deploy, the Zero was a death trap. The Hellcat allowed average pilots to achieve above-average results. The Zero required exceptional pilots to achieve exceptional results. By 1943, Japan was running out of exceptional pilots. America was producing average pilots by the thousands. Wake Island, October 5, 1943. The encounter that opened this story. Commander Sakaida's 9 victory career ended at 0658 hours when Ensign Robert Duncan, flying his 8th combat mission, still learning the Hellcat's nuances, put a 4-second burst into Sakaida's Zero from 400 yards. The Zero's unarmored fuel tank exploded. Sakada never got out. His wingman, trying to turn with another Hellcat, discovered that the American fighter could maintain a turn at high speeds the Zero couldn't match without stalling. The Hellcat's aileron hydraulics and structural strength allowed aggressive maneuvering at 300+ mph. The Zero's lightweight ailerons seized up above 280 miles per hour. Couldn't move them, couldn't turn, couldn't evade. The wingman died at 0701 hours. By 0715 hours, all 8 Japanese fighters over Wake Island were gone. Shot down, destroyed, erased. 0 Hellcat losses. The pattern repeated. Tarawa. November 1943. 28 Zeros engaged 36 Hellcats. Result: 28-2, Hellcats favor. Kwajalein, December 1943. 40 Zeros engaged 50 Hellcats. Result: 38-1, Hellcats favor. The numbers were getting absurd. And Japan's Naval Aviation Command was beginning to realize they had a catastrophic problem. The Zero wasn't just losing fights, it was being systematically annihilated by a fighter that shouldn't exist. A heavy, armored, powerful brute that broke every rule of aerial combat design and worked anyways. By January 1944, Japanese intelligence reports referred to the Hellcat as the most dangerous American fighter in the Pacific. By March 1944, 0 pilots who survived encounters with Hellcats were debriefed about tactics, vulnerabilities, opportunities. Their consistent answer: don't engage. If you see Hellcats, escape if possible. Japan's aerial samurai, the pilots who dominated Pacific skies for 2 years, were now being told to run from American fighters. The psychological impact was devastating. But the real annihilation, the moment that would define the entire Pacific Air War, was still ahead. June 19, 1944. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where the Hellcat would prove, once and for all, that Japan's aerial superiority was not just over. It was extinct. June 19, 1944. 1,000 hours. Somewhere over the Philippine Sea, 200 miles west of Guam. Commander David McCampbell, Air Group Commander of USS Essex, sat in his F6F Hellcat at 24,000 feet, watching radar returns on his scope. Big radar returns. Big radar returns. Essex Air Group, this is combat information. We're tracking multiple raids inbound. Raid 1, 60-plus bogies. Raid 2, 40-plus bogies. Raid 3, 50-plus bogies. Raid 4, 70-plus bogies. McCampbell did the math. 220-plus Japanese aircraft inbound, headed straight for Task Force 58 and 16 American carriers. 7 battleships, 21 cruisers, 69 destroyers. The largest naval armada assembled in the Pacific War. This was it. The Japanese Navy's desperate counterpunch. Everything they had left. Every flyable aircraft. Every pilot with enough training to find a carrier. They were throwing it all at the Americans in one massive strike. "All Hellcats," McCampbell said into his radio, voice calm as Sunday morning. "Weapons free. Let's go to work." What the Japanese didn't know, couldn't know because their reconnaissance had failed, was that Task Force 58 had put up a combat air patrol of 450 fighters. Most of them Hellcats. This wasn't going to be an air battle. This was going to be an execution. Raid 1 hit first. 69 Japanese aircraft, Zeros, Judies, Kates, Vals, in a ragged formation. They'd launched from Japanese carriers 300 miles away. Long flight. Formation discipline had decayed. The Hellcats hit them 70 miles from the task force. McCampbell led the first bounce, diving out of the sun with 8 Hellcats in loose formation, 400-plus mph, altitude advantage, every tactical card in the deck. The Japanese formation scattered like pigeons hit by a car. McCampbell centered his Pipper on a Judy dive bomber, fired a 3-second burst, 240 rounds, and the Judy disintegrated. Pieces everywhere. The tail went one way, the wings another. The fuselage tumbled like dice. His wingman splashed a Kate torpedo bomber at 600 yards. 1 burst. Fireball. The other 6 Hellcats in McCampbell's section destroyed 11 more Japanese aircraft in the next 90 seconds. 90 seconds. 11 aircraft. The surviving Japanese planes broke formation completely. Some tried to dive away. Some tried to climb. Some froze, flying straight and level, as if paralyzed by the sheer overwhelming violence. None of it mattered. The Hellcats hunted them down systematically. No dramatics, no aerobatics, just cold, efficient elimination. Dive, fire, extend, climb, next target. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Of the 69 aircraft in Raid 1, 42 died before getting within 50 miles of the task force. The remaining 27 pressed on. Desperate. Determined. Doomed. 18 more died to the second cap layer at 30 miles. 9 reached the task force perimeter. Anti-aircraft fire from battleships and cruisers shot down 7. 2 aircraft, a single Judy dive bomber, and a single Zero fighter, actually reached attack position. Cevis, the Judy dropped its bomb, missed USS South Dakota by 300 feet, and was shredded by 5-inch shells 2 seconds later. Sits, the Zero strafed the deck of USS Bunker Hill, causing minor damage, and was obliterated by 20 mm anti-aircraft fire. Raid 1, 69 aircraft launched, 69 aircraft destroyed, 100% losses. Raid 2 inbound, combat information reported, range 40 miles. Raid 2 never made it past 60 miles. Hellcats from USS Yorkton, USS Hornet, and USS Cowpens intercepted them in 3 coordinated waves. The Japanese formation, 47 aircraft, met 58 Hellcats. Combat duration, 14 minutes. Japanese losses, 45 aircraft. Hellcat losses, 2. 1 Hellcat damaged by Japanese defensive fire. Pilot landed safely aboard Yorktown with 127 bullet holes in his aircraft. The armor had held. The self-sealing tanks had held. The pilot walked away. 1 Hellcat lost to a mid-air collision with a Zero. Deliberate ramming attack by a desperate Japanese pilot. Both aircraft destroyed. American pilot survived, rescued by submarine USS Pentado 4 hours later. By 1100 hours, Raids 3 and 4 arrived simultaneously. The Hellcats were waiting. Lieutenant Alex Vrasiu, flying from USS Lexington, led his division into Raid 3. His after-action report describes what happened with clinical precision. Contacted enemy formation at 20,000 feet. 50-plus aircraft, mostly Judys with Zero escort. Altitude advantage allowed single diving pass through formation center. Open.